Have you ever felt punished not for what you did, but for what you understood? You walk into a room, you smile, you listen more than you speak, and yet the atmosphere shifts. Conversations grow shallow. People glance at you, then away, uncertain. It's not that you're rude, arrogant, or strange. No, it's something far more subtle, yet far more powerful. You see things. You see through things. That's the danger. Intelligence, especially the quiet, intuitive kind, the kind that isn't trying to prove anything, isn't always met with admiration. Sometimes it's met with resistance, rejection, even fear. But why? Why is it that in a world obsessed with information, those who understand too much often find themselves standing alone? The answer isn't in logic, it's in emotion. It's not about IQ scores or college degrees. It's about what deep awareness does to people who are still hiding from themselves. There's a truth we rarely speak aloud. Intelligence is not just a trait, it's a disruption, a mirror. And most people cannot stand the reflection it shows. The presence of someone deeply perceptive can be as unsettling as a sudden silence in a room full of noise. Not because they've said anything confrontational, but because they haven't played along. They haven't accepted the illusion. They haven't danced the dance of appearances. And that non-participation is an act of quiet rebellion. It threatens the unspoken rules of comfort. This is what psychologists have come to call the mirror effect. The idea that people don't just react to intelligence, they react to how intelligence exposes their limitations. It's not what you say. It's the fact that your presence alone challenges their constructed sense of self. You become a spotlight in a room full of shadows. You didn't ask for it. You didn't try to be one. But when your thoughts run deeper than the surface-level exchanges most people cling to, they begin to sense it. And that sensing, that subtle awareness that you're different, that you're watching, makes them uncomfortable. Not because you're wrong, but because you might be right. And nothing frightens the average person more than someone who might be right too soon. Consider this. When we see someone with great physical strength, we don't question our own body. We admire theirs. When we meet someone with wealth, we might feel envy, but not shame. But when we stand in front of someone whose mind is sharp, nuanced, awake, it strikes at something much deeper. It's not external, it's internal. It confronts the very scaffolding of who we think we are. And that's terrifying, because most people don't want to see themselves. They want to believe in themselves. There's a difference. Enter the intelligent mind, not the loud one, not the self-congratulatory one, but the quiet observer who notices what goes unspoken. The one who questions the story beneath the conversation. The one who detects contradiction in the calmest voice in the room. The one who sees the lie and doesn't flinch. This person doesn't need to speak to threaten the group dynamic. Their awareness alone introduces a sense of vulnerability into the social fabric. It's as if everyone can feel that they're being seen, not judged, but seen. And that kind of clarity is deeply unsettling to those who haven't yet seen themselves. Philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer believed that intelligence was not a blessing, it was a curse. Not because intelligence itself is painful, but because of how it separates you from others. The deeper your insight, the more disillusioned you become. The more aware you are, the less you can participate in the theater of society. And society needs theater to survive. He once wrote, "A high degree of intellect tends to make a man unsocial." Not because the intellectual avoids people, but because people avoid what they don't understand. It's easy to romanticize intelligence in hindsight. We celebrate the great minds long after they're gone. But in the present, we resist them. We mock them. We exile them from the conversations that actually matter. Because here's the brutal truth. Intelligence isn't threatening because it's powerful. It's threatening because it's revealing. It shows us the cracks in the system, the lies we tell ourselves, the illusions we cling to, the comfort zones we refuse to leave. And most people would rather remain in the illusion than step into the light. That's why intelligent people, especially the emotionally intelligent, the self-aware, the ones who don't need validation, are often left out, not lifted up. They don't conform to the social script. They ask inconvenient questions. They don't laugh at things that aren't funny. They don't nod along just to make others feel comfortable. And that breaks the spell. Now imagine this happening in a world already addicted to distraction. a world where attention spans have shrunk, where depth is feared because it takes time, presence, effort, a world where being agreeable is more valuable than being truthful. In such a world, the intelligent person becomes more than a curiosity. They become a contradiction, an inconvenient reminder that there's more, that there's depth beneath the noise, that there's meaning behind the madness. And so they're pushed to the margins. But what if the margins are where the real story begins? What if the outliers, those who were misunderstood, misread, misjudged, aren't broken, but necessary? What if being too much for some people simply means you're tuned in to a frequency they haven't discovered yet? That's where this story is headed. Because once you understand why intelligence is feared, you can begin to see your own experience in a different light. Not as a burden, but as a signal that you are perhaps more awake than you thought. And if this resonates with you, even just a little, I invite you to stay with me. The deeper truths are just beginning to unfold. If you're someone who's ever felt silenced, misread, or exiled for how deeply you think or feel, this space is for you. If you believe that intelligence should be celebrated, not shamed, welcome. If this video is speaking to something inside you, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps more than you know and gives us the momentum to keep creating the kinds of videos most platforms avoid. Let's build something meaningful here, together. There's a hidden war being waged, not with violence, but with silence. And it's not fought in public squares or political arenas, but in dinner parties, office meetings, and friend circles. It begins the moment a single mind dares to go deeper than the room allows. And before a word is even spoken, the rejection begins. Not because the intelligent person has done anything wrong, but because the other's minds are already on high alert. There's something primitive at play, something raw and ancient. When a deeply perceptive person steps into a space, their presence alone can activate discomfort in others. And that discomfort doesn't arise from malice. It's biological. It's built into the architecture of the human mind. To understand why society pushes intelligent people to the margins, we must look beyond philosophy and into the circuitry of our brains. In the heart of our emotional brain lies the amygdala, an almond-shaped cluster that governs our responses to threat. Originally designed to detect physical danger, like a predator rustling in the brush, it hasn't evolved much. In the modern world, it doesn't just light up when we're in physical danger. It reacts to psychological threat too. And intelligence, when perceived as superior or confronting, is a threat to most. Why? Because intelligence doesn't just introduce new information, it introduces dissonance, it disrupts certainty, it threatens the mental scaffolding people build their lives around. When someone like Kaori Watanabe walks into a conversation and through just a few questions exposes the shaky logic holding it together, the group doesn't thank her. They tighten, they defend, they deflect. What's happening isn't debate, it's neurological defense. We evolved not to survive truth, but to survive together. For most of human history, belonging to the tribe was more vital than being correct. A brilliant hunter who questioned the tribe's rituals could still end up alone and dead. Acceptance was survival. Dissent was danger. This evolutionary residue lives on in us today. We may wear suits instead of skins, but the brain still scans for the same cues. Do you make me feel safe? And if your intelligence threatens the status quo, the answer is no. Even worse, the smarter you are, the less likely you are to signal comfort. While others echo popular opinions to blend in, you question the very premise. While others chase consensus, you raise inconvenient truths. And in a group setting, especially where status and identity are on the line, that makes you a disruptor. This is what Schopenhauer foresaw when he described society as fundamentally driven not by truth-seeking, but by the will to live, the irrational drive for comfort, pleasure, and safety. The intelligent person, he argued, is guided instead by a different force, the will to truth, a drive to understand, even if it leads to discomfort, even if it leads to exile. And the two wills are always in tension. In social groups, this tension becomes stark. The group operates on unspoken agreements. Let's not go too deep. Let's not rock the boat. Let's preserve the illusion. But the intelligent person threatens that harmony. They don't mean to, but their questions, their clarity, even their silence, disrupts the equilibrium. Take the phenomenon we now understand as social disruption theory. When a person's presence or ideas fundamentally challenge the internal narratives of a group, the group instinctively works to neutralize them, not through reasoned argument, but through social cues, ignoring, ridiculing, excluding. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's subtle, a change in tone, a forced smile, an awkward laugh that isn't quite right. But make no mistake, these are defensive moves, the tribe protecting itself from change, and the biases we carry only deepen this resistance. There's the Dunning-Kruger effect, where those with limited knowledge overestimate their competence. In such minds, an intelligent perspective doesn't feel like illumination, it feels like insult. And instead of curiosity, it breeds contempt. Then there's status quo bias, which leads people to favor familiar beliefs over complex new truths. It doesn't matter if the truth is better. If it's unfamiliar, the brain flags it as danger. Most insidiously, there's the backfire effect. When presented with evidence that challenges their worldview, people don't reconsider, they double down. It's not rational, it's emotional, it's survival. These reactions aren't signs of stupidity. They're signs of how the brain protects identity. Because intelligence, at its most potent, doesn't just challenge what people think, it challenges who they think they are. And when you challenge someone's sense of self, you don't just start a conversation, you start a war. Even if you whisper, even if you say nothing at all. This is why intelligent people like Soraya Costa have retreated from public forums, not out of bitterness, but out of recognition. They understand that in most spaces, truth isn't welcomed, it's endured, if at all. And enduring is not the same as integrating. It's tolerating an allergy, hoping it passes quickly. But what does this mean for those who can't unsee the patterns, who can't unlearn the lies? Are they doomed to walk alone? Not necessarily, but they must walk carefully. The path of the intelligent mind is not to confront everyone head-on. It's to understand what you're dealing with, to recognize when a room is armored, to know the difference between an invitation and a trap, and most of all, to stop expecting the crowd to clap when you tell them the stage is on fire. The deeper truth is this: rejection isn't always about you. Sometimes it's about what you represent. You don't just bring knowledge, you bring transformation. And transformation is terrifying to a mind that has built its identity on staying the same. Schopenhauer knew this. He didn't hate society, he simply saw it clearly. He saw that truth, real truth, rarely arrives to applause. It arrives to silence or suspicion. But in time, the very things that once provoked fear become the foundations of the next era. And so, if you feel pushed away, minimized, or left out, not for how you behave, but for how you think, remember, you're not defective. You're not too much. You're just tuned into something most aren't ready to hear. And readiness isn't your responsibility. Awareness is. The question becomes, what will you do with that awareness? That answer begins in part 3. There is a particular kind of silence that follows understanding. It isn't peaceful or comforting. It's heavy. It's the silence of realizing that much of what surrounds you, what excites others, what keeps them tethered to routine, is not real, or at least not meaningful in the way they believe it to be. And in that moment of quiet, something inside you begins to shift. Clarity comes at a cost. For those like Kaori Watanabe, the philosopher who traded academic fame for the quiet discipline of parable writing, that cost was belonging. She didn't abandon the world out of arrogance. She stepped away because she could no longer pretend. The small talk at conferences, the applause for arguments that were more style than substance, began to feel like echoes in a hollow room. What she craved was not recognition, but resonance. And that is a hunger many intelligent people come to know intimately. To be highly intelligent is not just to process ideas, it is to see through pretense, to detect emotional falsehoods in conversation, to sense motivations others haven't even admitted to themselves. This level of perception isn't a skill you turn on and off. It follows you into meetings, into friendships, into love. And once you become aware of something, you cannot return to the bliss of not knowing. The curtain has been pulled back. The illusion is broken. And the world does not always forgive that kind of seeing. This is why intelligent people often speak less as they grow older. Not because they have less to say, but because they've learned that most people don't want to hear it. Or worse, they aren't ready. And it is a particular kind of grief to carry truths that cannot be shared, insights that remain locked in your chest because the room isn't built to hold them. Schopenhauer saw this isolation not as a flaw in the intellectual, but as the inevitable result of consciousness itself. The more one becomes aware of the mechanisms of human behavior, the more they feel the distance widen between themselves and the collective. It's not superiority, it's solitude. There is no joy in seeing through human deception, only responsibility. The responsibility to carry that awareness without turning bitter, without losing kindness. And that is the burden few talk about, the emotional labor of clarity. Soraya Costa, the neuroscientist who left her prestigious Lisbon lab to lead private mentorship circles, spoke once of this quiet burden. "I don't miss the research," she said. "I miss the illusion that I was surrounded by thinkers." Her departure was not a retreat from science, but from the ego games that had infected it. Her private work now focuses not on data, but on guiding others through their own mental awakenings. But even in those spaces, she admits, true connection is rare. Because when your mind operates on a different frequency, the loneliness is not just social, it is existential. This is what I call existential saturation, the condition of carrying too much mental awareness in a world that trades in surface experiences. Imagine walking through a museum, surrounded by priceless art, while everyone else is staring at their phones. Imagine reading the emotional script behind someone's words and knowing with painful clarity that they are lying to themselves. Imagine being in a relationship where you sense not only the other person's love, but also their fears, their unresolved trauma, their need for you to be someone you're not. And imagine knowing you can't fix any of it, not without shattering something they still need to believe in. This isn't paranoia, it's pattern recognition, and it wears you down. So you withdraw, not to hide, but to breathe. Solitude becomes sanctuary, not because you dislike people, but because silence asks less of you. You begin to enjoy walks more than conversations, books more than gatherings, not because you've lost hope, but because you're no longer willing to abandon yourself for company. The world doesn't often understand this kind of solitude. It mislabels it as antisocial or melancholic, but Schopenhauer called it something else, liberation. For him, the solitude of the thinker was not exile. It was the natural habitat of the honest mind. He wrote that the more unintelligent a man is, the less mysterious existence seems to him. And in that single line, he revealed a deep, often painful truth. To be intelligent is to exist in a state of near constant mystery. The mystery of why people hurt each other. The mystery of why lies comfort more than truth. The mystery of why, in a world full of ideas, so few are willing to think. Schopenhauer didn't idealize this state. He understood the depression, the alienation, the suicidal ideation that often accompanied the life of the thinker. And yet, he saw something sacred in it, a kind of dignity, a quiet nobility in refusing to escape into illusion, even when illusion promised company. But where does that leave you? If you are someone who sees more, feels more, thinks more, what do you do with that burden? You begin, perhaps, by accepting that not all loneliness is a problem to solve. Some loneliness is a signal, a sign that your soul has outgrown the conversations you're being offered, a sign that your mind is no longer willing to trade clarity for comfort. And from that place, you start building, not walls, but spaces. Spaces where depth is not a liability, where your voice doesn't echo back emptiness, where connection is not measured by similarity, but by sincerity. These spaces may be rare. They may take time to find, but they exist. They are being built right now, quietly, by people like you. People who have chosen not to perform, but to persist. People who know that the path of the deep thinker is not a straight line toward applause, but a spiral inward toward truth. And in that spiral, you may walk alone, but you are not lost. Because clarity is not just a burden, it is also a compass, and it is pointing you forward. To walk the world with a mind that questions everything is to carry a light in places that prefer the dark. But what happens when you realize that your light doesn't inspire curiosity, it provokes resistance? What does an intelligent person do when their insight, rather than opening doors, seems to close them? When their questions silence rooms, not because they lack value, but because they demand thought, in a world addicted to ease. For the deep thinker, the challenge is not just isolation, it is navigation. Not merely seeing the world's illusions, but learning how to walk among them without losing yourself. Intelligence without wisdom can become bitterness. Awareness without strategy can become self-sabotage. And the gift of clarity, if not held with care, can make even the most compassionate person feel like a stranger in their own life. Schopenhauer warned of this descent into disillusionment. He understood that intelligence could lead to frustration, even contempt, if it failed to recognize the psychological forces that govern the collective. The mistake many thinkers make is assuming that truth alone is enough to persuade. It isn't. Truth may be universal, but it is not always welcome. And those who try to impose it too directly often find themselves met not with understanding, but with defensiveness, dismissal, or even disdain. To live as a thinker, then, is to learn restraint, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. It is to understand that while the world may resist depth, it does not mean the world is your enemy. It simply means it is not ready, or not ready yet. Kaori Watanabe learned this early. After stepping away from the academic stages of Tokyo and Kyoto, she began crafting her messages with deliberate softness. She wrote with elegance, not as a performance, but as a way to thread truth through layers of emotional resistance. Her essays were never didactic, they were invitations. Doors half open, never slammed shut. She learned what all deep thinkers eventually must. If you want to reach people, you cannot force-feed insight. You must offer it gently, and only to those who are hungry. This is not manipulation, it is mastery. Just as a great musician adjusts their tempo to the acoustics of a room, the thinker must tune their voice to the emotional climate of their audience. Not every truth needs to be spoken in its rawest form. Not every insight needs to be revealed at once. Timing, tone, and empathy are not just tools, they are survival skills. But beyond softening delivery, the intelligent person must make peace with something even harder, the idea that they may never be fully understood by the many. And that is not failure, it is freedom. Soraya Costa, who now teaches privately in Lisbon, speaks often about what she calls micro-resonance. She teaches her students that connection does not require crowds, that the power of one true exchange, one moment of shared clarity, is more transformative than 1,000 likes on a clever idea. She tells them, "You're not here to go viral, you're here to go deep." And perhaps that is the rebirth, the renaissance, that Schopenhauer never lived to see, but helped pave the way for, a shift from mass approval to authentic presence. Deep thinkers do not need to conquer the world. They need only to find a corner of it where their mind is not a threat, but a gift, and they must build from there. In the mountains of Lucerne, the retreat center known as Der andere Weg was born from this very impulse. A place where thinkers, artists, and seekers could come together without the noise of social validation. No stage, no spotlight. Only conversation, stillness, and the slow work of inner unfolding. It is one of many emerging sanctuaries where intelligence is not performed but lived, where awareness is not an obstacle but a bridge. But not everyone can retreat to the mountains. Most thinkers live in the middle of noise, in cities, in families, in workplaces where depth is seen as inconvenient. For them, survival means creating subtle sanctuaries, a journal, a long walk at night, a weekly call with someone who listens with their whole heart. These small rituals are not luxuries, they are necessities. They remind the thinker that clarity, while rare, is still sacred, that it does not need to be sold, explained, or proven. It needs to be protected. Schopenhauer would have called this the art of selective exposure. Not to withdraw from the world entirely, but to engage with discernment. To know when a room is too small for your thoughts, and to leave before you shrink to fit it. To know when silence is wiser than truth. To choose your moments carefully, not out of fear, but out of deep self-respect. And when the moment is right, the thinker must learn to speak with precision. To use language not just as a vehicle of ideas, but as an art form. Because the real challenge is not having deep thoughts, it is translating them into something others can grasp without flattening them. This is the difference between a philosopher and a preacher, between impact and alienation. Albert Einstein once said that if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough. But simplicity is not the same as simplification. A simple truth, well expressed, retains its complexity. It just wears a gentler face. The intelligent person must train themselves not only to think deeply, but to speak clearly, not to dilute their message, but to open its doors. And this, perhaps, is the most radical act of the deep thinker in a shallow world: to keep thinking, to keep seeing, but also to keep loving, to resist the temptation of superiority, to remain soft in the face of misunderstanding, to hold the paradox that you may always walk a different path, and yet you are not above those who walk another. Because the final transformation of intelligence is not power, it is grace, the ability to know more and still forgive, to see farther and still reach back, to understand deeply and still remain kind. This is the renaissance we need. Not louder voices, but wiser ones. Not more opinions, but more presence. Not bigger platforms, but deeper roots. And for the thinker who feels alone in their insight, that is the path forward, not into exile, but into a new kind of leadership. One that doesn't demand attention, but invites transformation, quietly, consistently, unapologetically. The next chapter begins, not when society finally understands you, but when you no longer need it to. There's something unshakably tragic about being ahead of your time. You see too much, too soon. You speak truths no one is ready to hear. And so you wait, not for validation, but for the world to catch up. It's a lonely place to stand. But history has shown, again and again, that it's where the most important people have always stood. Socrates didn't live to see philosophy honored. Galileo died in confinement, exiled from the very scientific institutions his work would later shape. Nietzsche's words were once dismissed as dangerous ramblings. Van Gogh's brushstrokes, unappreciated, were buried with him in silence. And yet now, we study their work as if it were sacred. We quote them, we revere them, we wonder how no one saw their genius when they were alive. But the question isn't why society fails to recognize its deepest thinkers. The question is why those thinkers keep going, despite knowing they may never be understood in their own time. The answer lies in a truth that only becomes clear once you stop chasing applause. Deep thinking was never about being seen. It was about seeing clearly. People like Kaori Watanabe and Soraya Costa may never trend. Their names may never fill the pages of popular magazines. But in quiet rooms, in honest conversations, in books passed from one thoughtful hand to another, they are building something far more lasting than fame. They are building legacy. And legacy, unlike popularity, does not come from fitting in. It comes from standing where others are too afraid to go, and remaining there, even when the silence gets loud. This is the lesson Schopenhauer left behind, that intelligence is not merely the ability to solve problems or analyze data. True intelligence is the courage to remain awake when everyone else chooses the dream, to seek understanding in a world obsessed with agreement, to move through the noise without letting it convince you that you are wrong simply because you are alone. You are not alone. You are just walking a few steps ahead on a path that most haven't discovered yet. In a culture that celebrates immediacy, deep thinkers play a longer game. Their influence is rarely felt in headlines. It takes root in moments, quiet, subtle, profound. A question that stays with someone for years, a sentence that cracks open a dormant part of the soul, a conversation that shifts a worldview long after the thinker has walked away. So what can we take from this? What should you, the person listening to these words, carry forward from all of this? First, stop waiting for the world to understand you. That is a race without a finish line. The more you try to mold your voice to fit popular taste, the more disconnected you will become from your own essence. Your clarity is not a mistake. Your perception is not too much. The discomfort you feel is not a sign that you should change. It's a sign that the environment around you may not be designed to hold what you carry. Second, choose your moments. Not every setting deserves your full depth. Not every audience is prepared for your truth. That does not mean you should silence yourself. It means you must learn the art of discernment. Speak when your words are ready and when the soil is fertile. Otherwise, conserve your energy. You are not responsible for waking everyone up, only for not falling asleep yourself. Third, build your sanctuaries. Whether it's a circle of friends, an online community, a creative practice, or a place in nature, make room for your mind to breathe. These sanctuaries, no matter how small, protect your clarity from the erosion of shallow noise. They remind you that there are others like you, even if you have not met them yet. And they give you the strength to keep going, even when it seems like no one else understands why you think the way you do. Finally, lead, not with dominance but with quiet integrity. Intelligence, when tempered by humility and guided by compassion, becomes the most transformative force in the world. Not through force, not through spectacle, but through presence. Through living in a way that makes others pause and wonder what kind of truth you're anchored to. Through embodying the very clarity others fear, until they realize it's what they've been seeking all along. Schopenhauer may not have seen the future we live in, but he knew its outlines. He understood that culture moves in cycles, that what is ridiculed today becomes sacred tomorrow, and that those who carry the torch of insight must often walk through the darkest corridors before the light is welcomed. If you are one of them, if you think deeply, question honestly, and feel the weight of seeing what others ignore, then your role is not to be accepted. Your role is to keep seeing, to keep questioning, to keep building something beautiful, even if the world walks past it without looking, because the world will look. One day. It always does. The truths you hold will outlive the systems that rejected them. The words you speak will ripple long after the silence they were met with. The seeds you plant may not bloom for you, but they will bloom. And when they do, someone else, maybe someone who felt alone just like you, will find shade beneath the tree you grew with your solitude. So don't give up. Don't water yourself down. Don't turn away from your gift just because it isn't celebrated. This world doesn't always recognize wisdom in real time, but it always needs it. Before we close, let me ask you something. Have you ever chosen to stay silent in a moment when your insight could have changed the room, because you sensed no one was ready to hear it? If yes, what held you back? And if no, what gave you the courage? I'd love for you to share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if this series has spoken to something deep within you, if it's helped you feel a little more seen, a little less alone, please consider subscribing to the channel. It keeps us going, helps us reach more minds like yours, and gives us the momentum to keep creating the kind of content the world doesn't often make space for. Because we're just getting started.